You need to know there's a community out here who loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. I wrote that about 3.5 years ago. We just finished recording our first episode, and I knew I needed an outro of some kind. I was in a pretty bad place at that point in my life. I was stuck at a job where I couldn't be myself, was living in a house with a relative who would never truly accept me as the person I am. I was in the process of turning my life completely and utterly upside down, and I decided I needed to do something. I had some recording equipment, I had a lot to say, and I was starting to make enough friends that I thought I might be able to make something of this whole podcasting thing. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was welcomed with open arms into this amazing community of podcasters, and they've taught me so much about podcasting, about friendship, and about life. I even met the girl I'd eventually marry. I've gotten to travel to both coasts of the US and lots of places in between, and I've been deeply, deeply changed by the people I've met and the things I've gotten to experience on this journey. About 6 months after, I started a Patreon page, and I've been utterly overwhelmed by the support. It's enabled me to tell stories I never would have otherwise gotten to tell. At the end of the day, that's what it's about for me, giving people space to tell their stories and be heard. So many people deserve and never get that. And I try to give back. I do journals, we do Google Hangouts, and I've been able to share more of myself with my patrons, and I'm so grateful for all of it. But as a special thank you, I'm doing a thing. I've had so many people tell me since the beginning of the show that the words in the outro of the show mean a lot to them, and they mean a lot to me too. So as a way to say thank you, anyone who's been a patron of the show at any level as of today is going to get a poster with those words printed on it. And for the next 2 weeks, anyone who joins us at the $2 level or higher will get one. This is a limited time offer, and I will never print this exact design again or for anyone else. Maybe I'll do something else with the outro later and sell it to anyone, but this exact design is a one-time thing. If you're interested in this, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and make a $2 or higher pledge to get the poster. And check out the other levels while you're there. $4 gets a monthly hangout and discussion group, and $10 gets you a handwritten postcard and picture each month. I started this promotion last week, and hoo boy, have you all responded. I have a long list of folks to thank. Jade, Liam, Malcolm, Unholier Than Thou, Stephen, Dan, Emily, Jody, Charlie, Michael, Shelley, Janet. Thank you so much for signing up. And thanks to Catherine, Bryn, and Sean for increasing their pledges. You have until Sunday to sign up at patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto at $2 per episode or higher to get yourself a sweet poster. I won't be printing the same design again or for anyone else. Your contributions on Patreon really do enable me to tell these stories, and I am sincerely grateful. Hello, dear friends. My name is Callie Wright, and this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. One of the most annoying ideas in our public discourse about queer and trans folks is that we are a new phenomenon. I've seen enough conservative pearl clutching about this new trans thing to last my entire fucking lifetime. It's insidious, and you see it in the subtext of every breathless conservative think piece, right? This new phenomenon, this new trend, this new fad. My friends, this is not only just factually incorrect, it's also dangerous. Pretending like queer and trans people only exist recently in history robs us of a significant piece of our existence. Our history is in fact the history of humanity itself. You find people from all parts of the world and all cultures of all backgrounds who don't fit cisgender or heterosexual norms. We have always existed. The fact that the conversation about us has reached a new level of awareness does not in fact mean that we somehow just showed up on the world stage. We've always been here and we always will be. It's this context that makes illustrating and preserving queer and trans history so very, very important. And there are lots of people doing this really important work. And today we're going to be talking to one such person. His name is Josh Burford, and Josh is one of the founders of the Invisible Histories Project. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So can you just give me a bit of background on this project? Is there a particular story, particular thing that inspired you to want to do this?
Well, I mean, it goes back kind of a ways. I think when I came out in the early 90s, I was constantly being asked to do these classroom organization visits, where we like to call it the sort of queer zoo visit.
Oh, God.
a gay person, a lesbian person, a bi person in front of a room, and you can look at them and see that they were real humans.
Right. Yes, I've done that.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. It's pretty brutal. But I was doing this a lot. And the question that I kept getting asked over and over again was, I mean, this is interesting, but like, what about Alabama or what about Louisiana? And so I started my second half of my academic career trying to figure out how I would answer that question because I didn't know either. I mean, I didn't know anything about queer Alabama, and I grew up here. And so I started working on some archival projects after graduate school. I built 2 small collections in Alabama. And then I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in 2012 and started working on a citywide project. And so we were collecting the city's history. What I was really surprised about was that we had history that went back to the 1940s. Like, I never imagined we'd find it that old. The whole time I was in Charlotte, I kept getting calls from people in Alabama. Like, I mean, we love your work, but when are you coming home? And we have work to do here. And so my good friend Megan Sullivan, who's my co-director, called me, and this is 2015, and she said, so really, this has been great theorizing about this, but when are you coming home? Let's pick a date. And so I took the work that I was doing in Charlotte and figured out how we might be able to take a citywide project and expand that into a statewide project. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. I mean, it's been the most difficult decision I've made because there's so much work to do, but it's amazing.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you say there's a lot of work to do, and that's obviously because like there are lots of us and there's lots of history. But like, I also imagine that there is difficulty in like people just don't want to hear about this. People don't want to be reminded that we exist today, let alone the fact that we have always existed. So can you tell me about some of the resistance that you've run into?
Well, what's funny is that the resistance has not been what I expected. Like, I think when I said I'm moving back to Birmingham, Alabama to do queer history, everyone thought that I had, lost my mind and that this was the worst idea ever. In fact, I got pulled aside by several people in Charlotte. Now, again, Charlotte is sort of the South. I mean, it's South-ish. It's the northern part of the South, right?
Right.
And people were like, just be careful. And like, if you get into trouble, you call me. And I was like, what do you imagine my life is going to be like in Alabama? And so even in the South, there was this sort of idea that Alabama was just full of pitchforks. And God knows Alabama has given people plenty of reasons to believe that that's reality. Right. No question. 100%. But I think the resistance from non-queer folks has been mostly the idea that what we're doing is we're sort of wasting time, right? Like, well, you can't find anything. So like, why would you even bother? We've gotten some pushback, I think, sort of traditional pushback from people who are like, this is wrong. And, you're whatever, sinners or whatever all that stuff is people say. But truthfully, the biggest pushback that we've gotten is from queer people. And not because they don't want us to do it, but because they don't think there's enough of it to do. And so like, well, I mean, this is fine, but like, don't we have other things to worry about? Shouldn't we be talking about whatever we're supposed to be talking about? As if somehow the past doesn't inform what we're doing in the present. And so I think that we will probably get to a point when we reach critical mass where we'll definitely be getting the protesters with their signs that are misspelled out in front of our event. Because I don't know why protesters, I don't know why the right can't spell, but like,
spell check, it's a thing.
Thank you. You're spelling sodomy wrong. Like, you just have that one word. Like, come on. Like, what are you doing? I don't understand. But I think at a certain point we'll get there. I just think that, people are always so surprised, both that we're actually doing the work, that people are excited about the work, and that we're finding stuff. I mean, just last week, we got an email from a guy that lives in California. His family's from Birmingham, and his mother is their sort of family historian. And they have a great uncle in the family who was a drag performer in Birmingham in the 1920s.
Whoa.
I know. And so we got a photo via email. Is this something you'd be interested in this amazing drag from the 20s? Like, that sort of flapper androgyny that was so popular at the time, like that page boy haircut and flat chest, hot look. But these drag performers from the 1920s, and so even my own expectation of what we can find is constantly being challenged, and so I'm excited more than I'm nervous.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me about some specifics of some of the things that you found. Like, I'm sure there's probably things that are to be expected, right? But there's probably a lot that's surprising too. Can you kind of just go through and just tell me about some of the stuff that you've run across doing this? So like the project that you in particular are doing, you're collecting things like oral histories, newspapers, meeting minutes, pictures, posters, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and a lot of ephemera too. And there's a lot of textile stuff. So t-shirts, dresses, buttons, necklaces, things like that. And so yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're collecting traditional manuscript collection, so letters, photos, minutes, posters, things like that. But then also a fairly substantial amount of ephemeral history too. And so I think if you're asking me like what's the most interesting thing we found, I think for me it's twofold. Something from very early in the 20th and something from later in the 20th. And so the oldest thing we found in the collection is from 1912. And it's a diary. Well, it's really a chapbook, which is sort of poetry and memoir.
Okay.
That was written by a gay man living in Birmingham. This is after the Second World War. I mean, after the First World War. He had moved back to Birmingham after the war and started keeping this diary of experiences that he had in relationships with men in Birmingham at the beginning of the 20th century. He wrote in this chapbook until the 1950s. And so there is a 50 years almost worth of recollections of what it was like to be queer and in Alabama in a time before gay was gay and then a time after we became more visible. And the chapbook is gorgeous. The poetry is so sexy, but like not overtly sexy. You know, it's got that early 20th century vibe where everyone's sort of looking at everyone's ankles or whatever.
Right.
But we found this piece because a local activist writer in Birmingham found this chapbook at a thrift store. He paid $3 for it. And he took it home because he thought it was pretty. And it's actually really beautiful. And like 2 years later, he opens it up and realizes, holy crap, like I've found a diary from a gay man living in Birmingham in 1912 with a picture, by the way, in the back of the diary of the actual author.
Oh,
so
my God.
It's phenomenal because it flies in the face of everything that we think about collecting like this, that things that old don't exist from queer history, that we were so closeted, there are no narratives, that we couldn't possibly have lived in rural Birmingham. And yet here's this piece that's basically like a giant middle finger from the past. Like you were totally wrong. And let me show you in the next 100 pages why that's true.
Well, yeah. And that brings up so many interesting questions for me, right? Because obviously I know that queer people have existed all throughout history, but at that point in time, it would be terrifying to go out and try to pursue those relationships, right? So there's got to be this entire underground world community of people that exist to facilitate that. And so it just brings up so many more interesting questions for me. That's so cool.
The other thing that I think is it's more contemporary, but it was really surprising when we found out was that Birmingham opened an LGBT center in 1980. 1980.
Wow.
A citywide, it was called the Lambda Center. It had 2 locations, and a group of local community activists get together, they raise some money, they find a building, they open an office in 1980, and that center is open for a decade. So the entirety of the AIDS epidemic in Alabama, there is an LGBT community center. They have a center there's no other place in this state that had it, but there were very few places in the South that had this kind of direct, visible community outreach. And so they had people driving from 4 and 5 hours away to come to movie nights. They hosted the Southeastern LGBT Conference in 1982. They had political forums. They advocated for HIV/AIDS outreach in the mid-'80s. All of this is happening, and it's just amazing that it's happening so early, in our organizational history. Because again, in the 70s, you would find some community centers, but they were all really urban and coastal. So the idea that Birmingham had one for a full decade is extraordinary, and that there's such a record of it. There are articles in the Alabama Forum, which is an LGBT newspaper, but also in the mainstream press. And so they were not hiding. They were full front, visible, and doing the work of community organizing well before people imagined that stuff was happening in the American South.
Yeah, because I remember growing up, as a suburban white kid, I was vaguely aware that gay people existed, you know what I mean? But in my mind, it was the late 90s before anything publicly was going on in relation to queer. I mean, let alone talking about, trans activism and trans people existing, which we have obviously existed forever as well. I think that,
yes.
we've, pushed even maybe a little further underground. But yeah, that's amazing to me because obviously, I don't think it's news to anyone that there would be those sorts of underground groups and, people organizing in living rooms and stuff like that. But like for there to be something that's like publicly open, like with a storefront and community gathering and stuff like that, that just, I don't know. I almost feel bad that I'm surprised by it because I feel like I should know my own history better than that. But like, I think that speaks to how effective the right has been at silencing our existence, right? Like, kind of like I was saying at the top of the show, where it's like every conservative think piece acts like this is some new phenomenon. Like even gay people, being gay is almost normal in society now, I feel like. And they still in some ways treat it like, oh, it's this new phenomenon. Right. And, and when I think through that, I think about my own perceptions of my own community. And I think that propaganda worked on me because I'm just continually surprised by all of this. And maybe I'm not surprised so much that it existed, but I guess I'm surprised by the extent of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's exactly how you're supposed to feel. It's the consequence of the fact that our centerpiece narrative in the queer community has always been, invisibility, right? So that we all of us even now are in constant states of trying to reach a level where we can be seen. And this is true, I think, especially in trans communities now with language, with pronouns, with people's constant dead naming, like that invisibility piece is built into the fabric of the first day that we realized we're not straight people. And that narrative is old. I mean, that goes all the way back. And so we've been living in that idea of invisibility and the fighting of that, which is why coming out was so important, right? In the 70s, like we came out because we were planting a flag, like we were claiming visibility. But part of that problem of invisibility is that we have been so protective of our history and our publications and our experiences that you would never have seen it. You should always be surprised that you find trans history from the 40s because there's nothing in your everyday life that would make that a regular occurrence. No matter how vaguely normalized gay and lesbian identity has become in the 21st century, there's still that part of ourselves that believe we're the not good kind of exceptional, right?
Yeah.
That we're
And I feel like some of it is self-defense, right? Because the more we push ourselves into mainstream culture, the more pushback we get, right? And I was reading a friend of mine on Facebook made this big long thing about how if I could just go on an island with other trans folks and never be around cis people and never exist in cis culture, I'd be fine with that. And I honor those feelings. That's not how I feel. I would like to just live in broader society as a person and just be treated normally. Right. But I honor the feelings of people who feel that way. And I feel like, when you were talking about sort of being defensive and being protective of our history, I feel like it may not even necessarily be a malicious motivation that some of this stuff gets hidden, right? It's a thing that's just for us. It's not a thing that should be in the public eye. Is that something that you see?
Well, and people say all the time, aren't people hesitant to give you access to personal information, right? Somehow the queer experience has no public life. It's all a private enterprise. And I mean, sometimes we are asking people a lot. We're asking them to give us letters and photos and experiences of both trauma and joy, right? So there is something personal to that. But the problem with that idea is that means we never had a publicly accessible identity for anyone else except for ourselves. And that is limiting us. It really is. We have to imagine that there is a public queer life that we are part of. And if we are part of the public, then that means our history should be available. And so you're right. There is a sort of it is a self-defense in a way that you organize your structure of your life around what you think is possible for your individual identity, however you fall in the alphabet soup, whatever that is. And you must stay in your lane. And then occasionally, maybe you might find something out that happened in the past, but you probably won't. And we're trying to change that. I mean, these queer history projects all over the country that are doing this work, we're doing this work not just for pure preservation, but also to walk people into a room full of material and say, let's imagine what we could do as a queer community and a trans community together moving ahead, knowing what we have learned from the past. And so it's an exploratory journey to trying to get people to sort of shake off that notion that they can only have a private life and never a public life.
Yeah. Well, and that's it amazes me that we still have to have that argument about whether or not history is relevant to the present and to the future, right? Because, there are people who think that we shouldn't be public now and, let alone that we should have been or even were in the past. So yeah, it's just, it's interesting to me. So there are lots of, I think, preconceptions about the South and people in the South and maybe even queer people in the South. Are there any of those in particular that you run into a lot that are just kind of like blown out of the water by the work that you do?
Well, so there's two that really drive me a little bit batty. The first, and I think the most enduring narrative, is that there is no Southern queer experience. And if there was, then that experience is only manifest as an escape. So like you might be gay and from Louisiana or whatever, but like your job is to get the hell out of the South so that you can be productively queer in these theoretically, it gets better spaces, whatever the hell that looks like. So that's one is absolutely not true. The other is this idea that the South was always behind. And so, I say this a lot to people, like the South has earned a lot of its reputation, but its main responsibility in American culture is to act as a foil or as a cautionary tale. And so as long as quote unquote racism exists in the South, then it's better other places. And so people feel good about themselves living in urban spaces around the coast because of the South, even if that's all horseshit. And so we remain this kind of like, well, if you don't want to be as bad as Alabama or you don't want to be as bad as Mississippi, as a way of making people feel better about themselves. So first of all, Southern queer culture goes all the way back. I mean, we have people, gender nonconforming people, participating in Southern history as early as the 1840s. And so there is evidence of that. So they were there. Queer men and women were engaged in social upheaval and change all the way back to the turn of the century. So all that stuff that's being behind is absolute garbage. I mean, the first gay liberation front chapter in the American South is in rural West Georgia in 1971. That was a year after it started in New York, not 20 years after. And so this idea that we were behind is a joke. I heard this all the time growing up in the South when I came out. Well, we're just a little bit behind everyone else. It'll just take time, blah, blah, blah. As if somehow we're the only people with problems. And so that's just garbage. That's absolute and total garbage. And the South is so queer. I mean, look at anything that has been produced about the South for the past 200 years, and you tell me that Southern masculinity and it's like seersucker suits and sitting on the porch drinking mint juleps, it's not queer as hell. I mean, come on.
Yes.
Southern women, like, out hunting and like doing all this like butch stuff. Tell me that's not queer. Come on. I mean,
yeah, I had never thought of that, and that's there are several blind spots that I have been that have been taken away from me, and all of the conversations that I've had through the podcast. But the idea that the idea of the South as this just generally backward place full of like unintelligent, backward people who are perpetually 100 years behind. Like that was something that I found myself, like if somebody had directly asked me if I thought like that about people in the South, I would have said, no, of course not. But if I looked at, some of the things that I said, some of the things that the reactions that I had when I would hear about something bad happening, in rural Georgia or West Virginia or Alabama or anything like that, I think that really betrayed that I did have that mindset for a while. And it really is, it's a projection, right? It's a way for us to feel better because someone else is worse, right? And it's not that bigotry doesn't exist in the North or in urban areas. Oftentimes it just looks a little bit different. It's like it's dressed up more in a I guess a quote unquote more sophisticated way, right? Like people in the South misspell protest signs. People in the North get bad articles published in scientific journals. Like they're not they're not good either way. They just maybe look a little different.
That's right. Well, and this idea that somehow we are all queer people in general, we're always measuring ourselves against the places that we have arbitrarily decided are the homes of queer life. So New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, maybe Seattle. Seattle's trying to get itself in Portland. These places that are very urban, that have very specific amounts of concentrated wealth, that offer anonymity, right? Like that. I mean, we're all if Birmingham is measuring itself against the West Village or Boys Town, we will never win. We will always be backwards. We will always be behind. So for us, we want to change the metric. So then what is the metric for successfully queer? Organized, check. Political, yes. Pissed off, absolutely. Full of multiple identities, 100%. Always getting it right? No, because nobody always gets it right. Mm-hmm. But willing to challenge when we don't get it right, then absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I think is so enduring about an enduring problem that we have as queer people is racism in the queer community.
Absolutely.
That racism doesn't live in Mississippi. Like, it lives in New York and Omaha and Seattle and all these places. And so if the South can do anything, if our legacy, quote unquote, of racism is the thing that people think about us, then fine. Let us leverage that to talk about how we are acting as racist assholes in the queer community everywhere. Let us lead that conversation if you're going to give us this one thing. And so we're always trying to change the nature of that dialogue with the work that we do. So just recently in July, I did a queer history talk for a couple hours with a group of local queer youth. There's a place here called the Magic City Acceptance Center that does queer youth outreach. And so they were having their camp, which has a really clever name that I can't remember. And so I got invited to do queer history. I spent 2 hours sitting down with, these young people. They were like 15 to 18. And they sat and we talked and dialogued about queer history. And we brought materials in from the collection and laid them out on the table. They were reading newspapers. And they were asking the kinds of questions that we want everyone to be asking. Like, why don't I know about this? What do I do now that I know? What can we be doing to effect change in the community? So we want to inspire that, not just in the South, but everywhere that we can, if possible.
So when I was talking with Megan on the phone about, what you guys do and some, interesting things that you've learned and that kind of stuff. And something that she brought up that really shocked me, and I would love to hear you elaborate more on this, is that she mentioned that the actual highest concentration of queer people is in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone was shocked when that report came out, that Out in the South report. And it's the idea that I'm not really sure. I'm not even really sure what to do about it either, quite frankly. Like, I think it's a confluence of things. Like, if we have more queer people in the South, I'm gonna need people to show up for stuff. That's all I'm saying. Like, come on out. Like, we're over here. Like, we're in Alabama, so come hang out with us. But yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, I think the American South is just about the last place in the country where people can live affordably. And so there is an economics of living in the American South that just makes sense for people to live here. The idea of the myth of the wealthy cis white gay is just endured for so long, right? That somehow because we don't have children, or whatever that means, like we have more of everything. So the American South offers people at least the opportunity to live economically stably for most people. We do have a lot of poverty in Alabama. That's certainly true, but we at least give people the opportunity to try to eke out a life for themselves. It's not constant struggle. Now, that's probably changing. I saw a report today that Austin, Texas, is the amount of income you need to live there is like almost twice what it was a year ago. So it's changing all the time. But the other part is that, the American South still offers people, especially queer Southerners, the opportunity to engage in a multi-generational experience. So like I have relationships with my parents and my grandparents and my cousins and my nieces and my nephews because we are geographically so much closer. One of the things about Alabama that I always have really enjoyed is that you can be anywhere in the state in 4 hours. Like, and a lot of places will offer you that kind of geographic, availability. And so I'm just not surprised that there are so many queer Southerners here. I think that what really surprised people is that we weren't rushing to sort of live all in Boys Town in Chicago all together on one block, 20 people to an apartment. You know what I mean?
Well, right. Yeah. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, whenever you have this conversation about being queer, being trans in the South, like you brought up earlier about how like the entire conversation is about how people just need to get the hell out, and like, why are you staying there? Why are you still there? It's obviously so bad, move north, move to New York, move to San Francisco, et cetera, because it's better there. And, obviously, like you brought up the economic concerns, like, San Francisco is supposed to be the gay mecca, but like if you make less than 120 grand a year, you're considered to be in poverty there. So like, that's obviously like, just from an economic standpoint, that's not accessible, especially given that being queer and trans makes it far more likely that you're going to be in poverty of one kind or another. But I think there's another sort of, I guess, we can just call it like anti-Southern bigotry at play there, right?
100%. Well, I remember a few years ago, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was an ABC report about the Castro. And, they had reached this economic wealth, and it was predominantly, white, cis gay men and women.
And the Castro is the big gay neighborhood in San Francisco.
And they did an interview with the neighborhood association in the Castro, because there was an activist group that was looking to open up a queer youth homeless shelter in the Castro, because so many queer kids, thinking that San Francisco is the great mecca, making their way the best they could to California to try to get to a place where they could at least be themselves. And then the neighborhood association votes down the idea of putting a queer homeless shelter in the Castro because it would lower their property values. So it's like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So there's this famous interview that made it onto YouTube where someone, it was like an ABC affiliate, was talking to this queer kid, probably 18, 19 years old, and said, what do you make of the fact that this measure was voted down in this gay neighborhood? And he said, well, I guess we're all good enough to fuck at 2 a.m., but we're not good enough to have a roof over our head the rest of the time. And so like really like forcing us to think really hard about, when we say this is the gay mecca, right? Mm-hmm. When we say this is where people should be living, then what are the standards for that to happen? And so it's at the very least, we should be able to offer, if we're going to offer this image, this marketing about ourselves as being these urban sophisticates that live on the coast, the very least we can offer as the most at risk in our community basic shelter. But I mean, queer people are not immune from the problems of capitalism. They're not immune from racism. They're certainly not immune from the way in which cis people have these very particular blinders on about trans experience. And yet we are a great experiment. I was talking to some students this week about the fact that even saying something like LGBTQ is almost as much art as it is science. Mm-hmm. Because when we were putting ourselves together under the umbrella of shared struggle, there was a time when that made a lot of sense. I mean, that gay men and lesbians and trans folks and bi people, we were experiencing a very particular kind of struggle. That struggle is different now. Mm-hmm. And so we are clinging on to this notion of community that I'm not certain how much of it is still really true. I mean, I know that the queer people that I know and the trans people that I know who don't identify as gay or lesbian, who don't identify as part of this reemergence of gay mainstream culture, still feel like there's a lot of work to do, because there's still a lot of work to do. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have had their problems solved for them. Marriage equality was the answer to the question of
right.
Concentrate well, right? And that's what it was about. Yep. And so the thing that annoys me about the South, in particular, the way that it's framed, is that no one imagines there's anything to learn from the South. Mm-hmm. And Southerners believe this too. We don't believe we have anything to teach. And I just don't think that's true. I think, come and go to Houston, Texas, and look at what the queer community is doing there. Go to Hot Springs in Arkansas and see what their queer community is doing. And tell me that you don't have things to learn. I mean, the largest all women's, all lesbians community in the damn country is in Alabama. So tell me you don't have anything to learn about the South.
Tell me more. I am interested in this. I was not aware.
There's this amazing group of lesbian women that have been living in all women's, all lesbian spaces since the mid-'70s. Back in the mid-'70s, there were communities in Arkansas and upstate New York and Florida, and a couple other places. But as access to space and has gotten smaller and economics have gotten more difficult, those communities have kind of collapsed. And so I guess it was maybe 10 years ago, there was a community in Florida called Pagoda. And the Pagoda community kind of was shutting its doors because it was just too expensive to live there. Well, these women went on an exploratory tour to try to find a place they could live. And they discovered that if they moved to Alabama, they could buy 100 acres of land for what they were paying for an acre in Florida. And so they came to Alabama, they invested their money, and they opened up this community called Alapine, which is women's only, lesbians only space, inclusive women's only space, by the way, because they're not turfy and terrible.
Awesome.
Yes. And so women's only space, and they live in this community. I think I'm not really sure how many people live there total, but it's, 30, 35, female identified folks living on the land, taking care of themselves, setting their own rules. And they're literally holding on to decades worth of history and knowledge and experience about what it means to be political and a lesbian identified human. And it's amazing. And that's in Alabama. In Alabama.
So yes. Before I hit the record button, you'd show me that you'd brought some newspapers with you. I'm interested. Show me what you got there. Show me what's in there.
So a couple copies of the Alabama Forum. Alabama Forum was published as a newsletter starting in 1978, and it became a quarterly paper. Mm-hmm. And the Forum itself holds a ton of information about our history, but this one in particular I found really interesting. It's an article called Gay History of Birmingham, where they went back and interviewed gay men and lesbians living in Birmingham in the 1940s and their experiences of being gay in the 40s. It's phenomenal to be able to go back and read these narratives because none of these people are still alive. These people are all gone. And this particular article, you were asking before about interesting stories. This one has always really interested me because the people that they interviewed were basically recreating what the queer community looked like before they could really be out. And so there's this sort of play-by-play, like this is my line, or the line that I like. It says,
I was going to say, give me a little bit of what's in there.
In the early 40s, there were no openly gay bars, but there were some great pickup spots. The Drum Room in the old Tutwiler Hotel, the Red Room in the Redmont Hotel, and the Beverly Club near the old bus terminal were great places for people to wander around and have inadvertent and sometimes intentional gay community. Things got particularly gay just before midnight because back then everything had to close at 12. And the late night place to eat was also the greatest gay place to eat in Birmingham after 12 o'clock. And so they're talking about these like circuit parties and these gay takeovers of spaces. But it's so wonderfully shady in its own way. Right, because the article here says, I recall a very exclusive group, which I was not a part. That's how it started. They were not invited. They were the gay elite, and we referred to them as the Highland Avenue 400. And if you got invited to one of their parties, then you had made it in gay society. And so it's just, that could have been written 12 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, I caught a couple of things there when they talked about like, oh, this was so gay, and it's like, we've gone through this shift in my lifetime where when I was in high school, you called something gay when you were trying to say that it was bad. And we've now shifted to where we've completely flipped that on its head. And we're like, oh man, that's the gayest shit ever. That's a positive thing at this point. And so now you're talking to people who were back in the 40s and they were like, oh, this was wonderfully gay. That is so cool.
There's an article in the Forum too. The one that really struck me was the title is The First Signs of Gay Struggle in Montgomery, which, for people that are not in the South is the capital of Alabama. Mm-hmm. But it's a whole article about the fact that on the same block in Montgomery, there was the only gay bar that was owned by gay people and operated. And then 2 doors down was an African-American club that was owned by Black and brown folks. And in the early part of the 1980s, both of the bars were being raided by the police on a fairly regular basis. And after a big raid had happened and a whole bunch of people were arrested, the 2 bar owners got together and started a protest together to push back against police brutality in Montgomery. It was one of the very first opportunities that this sort of cross-identity, intersectional work was being done together because they saw themselves as being a part of something bigger. We are minority-identified folks of one kind or the other who are being directly attacked by police, and we're not going to put up with it. And so they sued the city of Montgomery together, this Black and brown bar and this gay bar together, so that their patrons could have a place to go and drink and feel safe and have community. And that's the kind of stuff that we're not hearing about. I want to see a balance. I think people always get very normative, I think, during Pride season, right? Like back in the day, pride festivals were like guys in assless chaps and drag queens and people making up.
Right.
Suddenly now there's family zones at all of our pride festivals or whatever, which is whatever. Do you. But like, I want to see that balance. And I think that's what a history project does. It gives us those moments of joy. The first pride festival, the first Pride Day in Alabama in 1980, and the first time we got politically organized with our sibling groups to push back against police brutality, and the work lesbian women were doing to save gay men who were HIV positive. And like, let's see that whole spectrum of queer identity so that, again, we can, what can we learn? You know, what can we do as well as they were doing or better than they had the ability to do now that we have technology and organizational skills and, you know, like economic stability that we didn't have in the past. And that's what I think we're missing, because what annoys me is that people want to have this sort of sunny, constant queer past. Well, it's not always sunny. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a lot of crap that we really got wrong. And this is especially true, I think, when you think about bi and trans erasure in our history, like the ways in which we have rendered trans women of color, specifically, history is wildly inert in an effort to create this sort of, what's the word, like sustainable and desirable queer history, right? Mm-hmm. So like, it's just these white cis people, and they were really holding it down, and they were doing good stuff because it was like too controversial to talk about trans women of color. And so we just push them aside, and you'll have your turn later, except that they never did.
Right.
But then you look at, you know, there's an article, the Gay Sunshine Review was a publication from the early 70s, and they did a lot of really anarchist, amazing, edgy stuff. But they published an article in 1970 called Trans Community Demands, and it's a 7-8 part list of demands from trans people from all over the country. And I show that to my students every year when we talk about trans history, because so much of what they were asking for in the 70s is so applicable to right this moment. You know, healthcare, access to agency, resources. And I want them to see, like, if a group of trans people were putting this together with no cell phones, no internet, very little connectivity, and constantly at risk for quote unquote presenting incorrectly, what can we learn from this that we could do right now? What can cis people be doing to take some of the pressure off of our trans siblings to be able to do the kind of political work that's necessary for what's beyond survival? Like, what is the thriving part of this conversation? And I think that's what constantly inspires me about my own history and seeing it inspire other people.
Gosh, that is so cool. Well, we could talk literally all day long about this. I have no doubt. But so if people want to contribute to what you're doing, want to learn more about what you're doing, can you tell us how we can do that?
Yes. So invisiblehistory.org is our website, and you can contact us there if you want to donate materials, you want to, you know, give us a little bit of money for the project. That's great. You can do everything from the website. We're on Instagram at Invisible History and Facebook at Invisible History. And one of our goals is to be as transparent as possible. So if you want to know what we're doing and how we're spending your money and what kind of projects we're working on, come and talk to us, and we're happy to help.
Very cool. I will have links to all of that stuff in the show notes. I'm also going to link in particular, there's a really cool video on the website about the first Gay Pride Day in Birmingham, which, like, that's such a cool video. So Josh, thank you first for the work that you're doing. I think it's super important just in educating people about our history. It's very interesting just on an academic level just to learn this stuff because it's really cool. But I also think it's very important political work. It's very important activism, showing that we have been organizing and fighting for ourselves for a very long time, much longer than is generally known. I think even inside our own community, and I think just that fact in itself is really, really important for people to know about. But I also think it's a really, really important pushback against the idea that being queer, being trans is somehow something new, or that, this stuff only exists in the North. And it's just blowing out a lot of wrong-headed ideas and stereotypes that frankly have needed to go away for a long time. And I think it's super important. So thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on the show. And most importantly, thanks for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gay Theist Manifesto. If you think what we do here is important, please share this around to your friends. Search the Gay Theist Manifesto on Facebook and Twitter to find us there. I'm at GayTheistCali on Twitter. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. We're a part of the Trans Podcast Invisibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other time. We're a part of the Trans Podcast Invisibility Initiative. We're a group of We are a part of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheist manifesto, make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and share us around to your friends. It all helps and it all makes a difference. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.